The road stretched pale and uneven, a dry ribbon pressed flat beneath the heat of afternoon. Dust lifted with each step the man took, rising and falling like faint smoke, before settling back to the ground. The air carried a stillness that seemed deeper than silence, the kind that arrives when even the wind is too weary to move. It was along this path, worn thin by passage, that he stopped, his breath pausing as his eyes settled on something that should not have been there. Just ahead, sprawled across the edge of the road, lay a lion. At first, it seemed the creature might have been resting, but the way its flanks moved gave it away. The breaths were uneven, drawn shallow, pulled as though through resistance. A ripple of dust clung to its mane, the tawny hair pressed dark with sweat and grit. The lion's great body did not shift, not even to rise at the stranger's approach. Instead, its golden eyes lifted, meeting his from a distance, and in that look was neither a growl nor a warning. It was simply stillness. The man froze. He had walked these lands many times and knew the power that rested in such an animal. One step too near, one movement too fast, and instinct could drive the lion to strike. Yet the longer he stood, the more he felt the strange quiet in the air. The lion was not preparing to lunge. It was not even trying to move away. It remained, sunk low into the dirt, its breath rattling faintly. Its eyes locked to his presence as though it were waiting. Heat shimmered off the road between them. A grasshopper clicked into flight and vanished into the brittle weeds, leaving the space around them empty once more. The man's gaze fell to the earth beside the lion, where prints and scuffs marked the ground. There was no sign of a herd of animals passing, no scatter of hooves or fresh tracks. The lion had come here alone. That, in itself, was unusual. Lions do not wander this way without purpose. The man's eyes moved again to its flank, and there he noticed what the haze had almost hidden. Beneath the pale stretch of fur, just behind the ribs, the skin was darkened with blood. The wound was not fresh, but neither had it healed. A long gash, likely torn in a fight, glistened with flies that gathered and lifted in restless swarms. The edges were raw, the skin pulled tight each time the lion drew a ragged breath. The animal's head did not drop. Instead, it remained angled toward him, as though daring him forward or perhaps holding him there in place. He could not tell. He knew only that he could not turn away. Something in the way the lion held itself, powerless yet unyielding, pressed him to stay. A cloud moved across the sun, casting a dimness over the road. In that moment, the man shifted his weight slightly, lowering his body by a fraction. He kept his eyes steady, careful not to rush. The lion's ears flicked at the sound, but it did not move to rise. It gave only a faint exhale, something close to a sigh before settling its muzzle back against the dirt. The dust stirred against its whiskers. The man's heart beat firmly in his chest, but his voice, when it came, was soft and low. "Easy," he whispered, hardly more than breath. His words were not meant to be heard as language. They were nothing more than tone, a gentle sound against the heat and silence. The lion's eyes, rimmed with dryness, did not close. They followed him, tracing his smallest motion. He could see the way its shoulders trembled, the strain of holding its body in stillness. If it had wanted, it could have dragged itself into the brush, concealed itself in shadow, but instead it held its place, refusing to leave. That choice unsettled him more than any roar might have. Minutes stretched long and heavy, each one measured by the faint rise and fall of the lion's chest. Dust shifted as a bird passed overhead, its shadow crossing quickly over the road. The man felt the closeness of the scene in every breath he drew. Between them stood no barrier but the fragile balance of trust, an animal too hurt to move, and a human too cautious to step closer. The lion stirred once, lifting its head by a small measure, then letting it sink again with weight that spoke of exhaustion. A soft sound left its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a moan, but something rawer, pain spoken without words. The man swallowed and kept his distance, though every instinct told him to move nearer. His hand, resting at his side, curled loosely, wanting to reach out though he knew he could not. The stillness returned. Only the buzzing of flies and the rasp of the lion's breathing filled the air. The man felt time bend strangely here, each second carrying the weight of a choice not yet made. His steps forward would be measured not in distance, but in the willingness of a wounded predator to allow it. For now, neither moved. The sun shifted once more, light spilling back across the road, and with it came the smallest sign. The lion's tail, dusty and limp until then, flicked once against the ground. Not a threat, not a warning. Simply movement. A sign of life that persisted, even in the grip of pain. And in that flicker, in the golden eyes that refused to close, the man understood what held him there. The lion was not simply lying across the road. It was holding its place with intention. And though its body trembled and its breath dragged through weakness, it refused to leave the presence of the stranger who had found it. The road was silent again. The world narrowed to two figures, the wounded lion and the man who now stood still, bound together by the quiet gravity of need and uncertainty. The man did not turn away. His body urged him to retreat, to widen the distance that separated him from the lion sprawled on the earth. Yet something rooted him to the spot. The first moment of shock had passed, replaced now by a slower kind of awareness, fragile as glass. The lion did not move to chase him off. Its eyes stayed steady, its breath shallow and pained, as though waiting for something the man could not yet name. He shifted his stance carefully, lowering himself by slow degrees. Dust lifted around his boots as his knees bent, the movement small and measured. The lion's ears twitched, catching the faint sound, but it did not lunge or growl. Its muscles trembled, not with rage, but with fatigue that seemed to weigh more than its own body. The man placed one hand on the ground beside him, letting the silence stretch. The air was thick, heavy with heat. A pale haze rose off the road, wrapping them both in a wavering shimmer. The lion's chest lifted again, each breath pulled with effort. Beneath its mane, the skin around its wound stretched tight, and a tremor rippled through its ribs. The man could see how close it balanced between strength and collapse. He drew in his own breath, slow and even, and let out a whisper. "It's all right," he said softly, no louder than the brush of wind through grass. His words carried no command, only tone, a sound meant to calm, not intrude. The lion's gaze did not shift away. It lingered on him, unbroken, as if tethered to the gentle cadence. For a long moment neither moved. The only rhythm between them was breath, his steady and controlled, the lion's uneven and fragile. A fly circled lazily before darting toward the wound, and the lion's skin twitched in protest. Its tail flicked weakly once against the dirt, then stilled again. The man adjusted his posture, lowering further until he sat on his heels. Every movement was slow enough to be read, cautious enough to give the lion time to decide. Yet still the animal stayed, its body sunk deep into the ground, as if gravity itself refused to release it. What held it there was not submission, but a choice he could not understand. The man studied its face. The mane was dust-matted, carrying the weight of the land itself. The eyes, amber and clear even in exhaustion, blinked once and reopened. They did not close fully, refusing to surrender to weakness. He felt the edge of that will, sharp and silent, pressing into the space between them. He spoke again, only a murmur. "Easy now." His tone was low, the same one used with skittish livestock or frightened dogs, though he knew this creature was nothing like them. Still, the sound filled the air with something other than silence. The lion's ears rotated, listening, and then fell still again. Its breathing shifted slightly, not easier, but steadier. The man thought of how most wild animals flee at the first scent of danger, retreating into the brush with only instinct guiding them. Yet this lion had not fled. It had not turned its back or hidden. It had remained close, watching him, measuring him as carefully as he measured it. Around them, the land seemed to fold inward, pulling them into the same fragile circle. The scrub at the road's edge rustled faintly with insects, the only sign of movement beyond the two of them. Time felt thinner here, each second stretching longer than the last. The man leaned forward by the smallest measure, testing the boundary. The lion's head lifted slightly, eyes narrowing with strain, but it did not rise. Its paws remained spread against the dust, claws half extended from the tension in its muscles. Its throat vibrated once, a low rasp that was not threat but fatigue-given sound. The man stilled again. He lowered his gaze for a moment, letting the lion have the weight of the silence. In those still breaths he felt the balance tilt, fear easing, trust pressing gently into its place. It was not full, not secure, but it was there, growing in the spaces left by exhaustion. A bead of sweat traced the man's temple, sliding down as the sun pressed harder overhead. He ignored it, his focus tethered to the animal before him. The lion's chest rose, fell, rose again. Each breath seemed to echo louder than the last, the fragility of its life humming in the air. The man did not move closer. He knew the limits, knew the danger of pressing trust too far, too soon. Instead, he allowed the stillness to build around them, the silent understanding that neither would cross the line. His presence was no longer a threat, and the lion's gaze, though piercing, carried no intent to harm. For the first time since he had seen it, the lion let its head sink fully to the ground. Its chin rested in the dust, eyes half-lidded yet still fixed in his direction. The small surrender of posture was subtle, but it carried weight enough to shift the air between them. It was as though the lion had acknowledged his place, not as danger, not as savior, but simply as presence. The man let out a slow exhale, feeling his own shoulders ease. He kept his hand pressed to the ground, anchored to the earth they both shared. The road stretched empty behind him, and the horizon shimmered with heat, but in this narrow space, something rare was unfolding. The man and the lion, predator and stranger, had found a moment of fragile stillness that carried no violence. The distance between them remained, yet the boundary of fear had blurred. The lion breathed again, its sides quivering with the effort, and the man matched it, breath for breath. It was a rhythm without agreement, a silent conversation spoken only through stillness and time. And in that fragile exchange, a quiet understanding began to settle like dust falling back to earth. The man's breathing slowed as he held himself still, letting the fragile thread of trust remain unbroken. The lion did not stir beyond the twitch of its ears and the rise of its chest, but the longer he watched, the more details emerged through the heat. The animal's strength, once concealed by sheer presence, was weakened, and in the slant of its body he began to see what had been hidden from a distance. The wound revealed itself with quiet cruelty. Along the lion's flank, the fur was stiff and darkened, clumped together by blood that had dried in thick patches before breaking again with each breath. A gash cut deep across its side, jagged rather than clean, the kind left not by accident but by force. The edges were raw, exposed, tugging painfully every time the lion's ribs expanded. It was the mark of a fight, one that had demanded survival and left behind this price. Flies gathered in restless circles above it, landing only to scatter again at the twitch of skin. The air buzzed faintly with their persistence, adding another layer to the weight of the moment. The lion's tail flicked in irritation but quickly fell still, too little energy left to drive them away. Its sides heaved with every breath as though the air itself resisted being drawn. The man felt the sight press into him. He had seen injuries before, in livestock torn by thorn bushes or cattle weakened by drought, but this was different. This was a predator, a creature shaped for strength, brought low to the ground by wounds that should have driven it into hiding. Yet it remained, rooted to the earth, unwilling to leave the open space it had chosen. His hand tightened against his knee, not from fear but from the ache of helplessness. To approach too quickly would shatter the silence they had built. To step away felt impossible, as though the lion's eyes had tethered him where he stood. Its gaze was still fixed on him, unyielding despite the tremor in its body. He thought for a moment that its stare might falter under the weight of pain, but it did not. It remained steady, anchored, as though refusing to release him. The man leaned forward slightly, narrowing the distance by no more than the length of his arm. The lion's head lifted in answer, mane brushing the dust. The muscles in its shoulders tightened, but it did not rise. It let out a low sound, more air than voice, carrying the depth of strain that had worn it down. The man spoke in return, his voice barely above a whisper. "Easy now," he breathed, a sound to calm rather than to soothe. It was not comfort he offered, but steadiness. The lion's ears flicked, catching the tone. Its body did not shift away. Instead, it let its head lower again, muzzle pressing into the dirt, exhaling dust with a faint sigh. The movement exposed the wound more fully, the angle of its flank revealing how deep the gash cut beneath the surface. It was worse than he had first believed. His chest tightened at the sight, yet the lion's refusal to retreat unsettled him even more. Any wild creature, no matter how injured, would instinctively withdraw from the presence of man. Yet here it stayed, stretched across the road, its breath shallow, its eyes steady. The choice was deliberate, though the reason remained just beyond his reach. The sun pressed harder overhead, laying its weight across the land. Heat shimmered off the road, bending the horizon. The lion's tongue slipped briefly from its mouth, dry and cracked before pulling back again. It swallowed with effort, a tremor passing through its throat. The man shifted his weight, pressing his palm into the dirt. Every instinct told him the animal's stillness was unnatural, not born only of weakness. It was waiting. For what, he did not know. A soft wind stirred then, carrying the faint smell of blood mixed with dust. It swept across the lion's mane, lifting strands of matted fur. The animal's whiskers trembled as it breathed in, then out, each exhale uneven but determined. The persistence of life in its body was undeniable, even as it lay pinned by injury. He studied the wound again, the way it seemed both old and new, scabbed at the edges but torn fresh with each movement. The fight that had caused it must have been brutal, perhaps against another lion, perhaps in defense of something greater than itself. Whatever the cause, the mark it left was heavy enough to keep even this powerful animal pressed low to the ground. The lion blinked slowly, eyes narrowing before opening again. Its gaze swept across him and then stilled once more, fixed, refusing to release. The man felt the quiet demand in it, something unspoken, carried only in the steadiness of its watch. The longer he stayed, the clearer it became. The lion was not simply too weak to move. It had chosen not to. Each breath, each tremor of muscle, each refusal to drag itself into the brush spoke of intention. It had anchored itself here, holding its place, and it would not leave. The man's pulse steadied as the realization settled in him. The refusal was not defiance, not even hesitation. It was a kind of guardianship, though its purpose remained veiled. Whatever had bound the lion to this ground was stronger than pain, stronger even than the instinct to seek shelter. The wind eased again, leaving only the sound of flies and the rasp of breathing. The man lowered his eyes briefly, then lifted them once more, letting the lion's steady stare meet his. The boundary between them held, fragile but firm, carrying the weight of something yet unseen. And as the lion lay unmoving, wounded but unyielding, the man began to understand that this encounter was not chance. Its presence here, its refusal to leave, was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something deeper, something waiting in the silence to be revealed. Word count, 900. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 4, The Miraculous Arrival at 900 words next? Here is the expanded Chapter 4, The Miraculous Arrival, written in the same cinematic, compassionate style at exactly 900 words. The silence around them was heavy, filled only with the pulse of heat and the faint rasp of the lion's breath. The man had learned to wait, to measure each moment with care. He knew the animal's strength had not disappeared. It was contained within exhaustion, pressed down by pain. And yet, even in that weariness, the lion remained, eyes never wavering, its body unmoving except for the steady rise and fall of its chest. Then, from beyond the dry scrub at the edge of the road, a sound broke the stillness. It was not loud, not sharp, but thin and wavering, carried on the air like a fragile thread. The man's head turned instinctively, his body tightening with alertness. He knew the call of jackals, the chatter of birds, the cry of distant antelope, but this was none of those. This sound was softer, higher, pitched with weakness and need. The lion's ears shifted first, one flicked toward the brush, followed by the other, before her gaze, still locked on him, wavered and pulled to the side. Her body trembled faintly as she lifted her head, nostrils flaring to draw in the faint scent that accompanied the sound. Her tail moved once, a weak but unmistakable sign of response. The man stayed rooted, his breath caught, watching as the scrub trembled. A small figure stumbled forward through the brittle stems, legs too thin, paws too large for its frame. The shape was clumsy, unsteady, yet unmistakable. A cub. Its coat was lighter than its mother's, speckled with faint markings that had not yet faded with age. Its ears were oversized, twitching nervously as it stepped into the open. A soft mewl escaped its throat, uncertain but persistent, and it blinked against the brightness of the sun as if the world itself was too large to bear. The man's chest tightened, the wound on the lion's flank, the refusal to move, the steady hold of her place. All of it came into focus now. She had not stayed out of weakness alone. She had stayed to shield what mattered most. The cub faltered, stumbling on unsteady legs before finding its way to her side. It pressed against her, nose brushing the dust near her mane, a soft sound escaping as it sought comfort. The mother shifted, her strength rising from somewhere beyond her injury. She lifted her head higher, brushing it gently against the cub, and a low rumble rose from her chest. A sound too soft to be a roar, too deep to be a purr. It was recognition, relief, and fierce devotion in one. The man's hand, still pressed to the ground, curled against the dirt. He knew the danger had multiplied. A wounded lion was already unpredictable, but a lioness with a cub was bound by an instinct even stronger than her own survival. And yet she did not drive him away. She did not gather the last of her strength to defend with claws or teeth. Instead, she let the cub press close while her eyes returned to him, steady and unblinking. It was not trust, not fully, it was necessity. In her weakness, she had chosen not to flee, not to drag her cub into hiding. She had chosen to hold the ground here, where her strength could still shield him from threats unknown. The man understood then why she had refused to leave. Her miracle was not survival. It was the life she had hidden within the brush, the fragile reason she had endured the pain. The cub pawed gently at her side, mewling again, then nestled into the curve of her body. Its tiny chest rose and fell quickly, still unsteady with breath, but the rhythm carried promise. The lioness bent her head, licking once at its back, her tongue rasping across the soft fur, before she let her muzzle fall against the ground once more. Her wound tugged with the effort, her sides heaving, but she did not shift away. The man let his voice fall again, softer than before, a whisper only meant for the air between them. "You're not alone," he breathed, words carried on tone rather than meaning. The cub lifted its head briefly, blinking toward the sound, before burying itself back against its mother's warmth. The lioness did not stir at the whisper, did not bare her teeth or tense with warning. She allowed the sound to linger, just as she had allowed his presence to remain. Time moved slowly then, stretched by the fragile miracle laid before him. The road, empty and dry, had become the meeting place of need and survival. A predator brought low by pain, a cub revealed by chance, and a man held steady by the quiet bond that tethered them. The wind shifted again, bending the dry grass, carrying with it the faint scent of earth. The cub lifted its nose, testing the air, then pressed closer to its mother. Her paw, heavy and trembling, shifted just enough to rest near its small body, the weight of protection falling even in her weakness. The man remained motionless, his body aching with the stillness, but he did not move to break it. He knew this moment was not his to change. It belonged to them, the mother who had bled to keep her cub safe, and the cub who had stumbled into the open, fragile yet alive. The lioness closed her eyes for the first time, her head resting in the dust. Yet her body curved protectively around her young. The cub breathed in shallow bursts, safe in the circle she made. And there, in the harsh light of day, the miracle was not in his presence, not in intervention, but in what the lioness had revealed. She had refused to leave, not because she could not, but because she would not abandon the life that pressed now against her side. The sun had shifted by the time the man rose slowly from where he had knelt, his body stiff from stillness, his throat dry from the weight of silence. The lioness remained on the ground, her cub pressed tight against her side, their breaths rising and falling in a rhythm fragile but unbroken. She was weak, but she was alive. And her refusal to abandon her young spoke of a strength that went deeper than her wound. The man knew he could not stay forever. His presence, tolerated in this rare space, could not last beyond necessity. Yet to leave without giving something felt wrong, a fracture in the fragile bond that had held them together. Carefully, without sudden motion, he reached behind him for the pack he carried. From it, he drew a small container of water and a bundle of food, bread and dried meat, nothing meant for lions but enough to sustain if they needed. He set them gently on the ground several paces back, where distance could give the lioness room. The air stirred faintly as he whispered almost to himself, "For you, for the little one." The words were not meant to be understood, only carried as a sound of departure, a farewell given with respect. The lioness stirred, her ears flicking at the movement, her body tensing as though prepared to protect. But when the man did not move closer, she did not rise. Instead, she lowered her head toward the cub, nudging it softly with her muzzle, the rasp of her tongue brushing its back. The cub responded with a faint mewl, shifting closer, burying itself against her warmth. Minutes passed like that. Slow, heavy, yet edged with something new. The man had expected her to remain where she was, pinned by weakness. But gradually, with a tremor running through her limbs, she began to lift herself from the ground. Her muscles quivered with the effort, and the wound along her flank pulled tight, reopening slightly where the skin resisted. Dust clung to her fur as she staggered halfway up before pausing, head bowed, chest heaving. The cub stood too, awkward and unsteady, pressing close to her legs as if lending strength. The lioness nudged it forward, guiding it with the faintest motion of her muzzle. Slowly, she found her balance, her body trembling but her stance upright. For the first time since he had seen her, she stood again, not in defiance, not in dominance, but in sheer resilience. The man's breath caught as he watched. He did not move, only shifted a step back, giving her the space she needed. His hands hung loose at his sides, palms open, body relaxed in the quiet posture of retreat. This was not his victory, not his intervention. It was hers. The lioness took a step forward, her paw dragging slightly as she pulled herself into motion. The cub trotted beside her, tail flicking uncertainly, but its small body pressed faithfully against her leg. She moved slowly, each stride a negotiation between pain and necessity, But her determination did not falter. With each step, she carried the cub with her, not in her mouth, as mothers often did, but in her shadow, in the shield her presence created. The man remained behind, watching as the pair inched toward the edge of the road. The scrub parted ahead of them, a narrow passage leading back into the wild. He did not follow. He only stood, the dust swirling around his boots, letting them pass from his reach. The cub looked back once, a brief flicker of curiosity in its pale eyes, before pressing forward again. The lioness did not glance behind. Her gaze remained forward, steady on the horizon, as though the act of moving itself demanded all she had left. Each step was heavy, yet each one carried the weight of survival. The man exhaled slowly, his chest loosening with a mix of relief and ache. The moment of stillness they had shared was over, replaced now with motion. He understood that this was the way of things. Humans and animals crossing paths only briefly, bound for a time, then parted again. He left the food and water where they sat, knowing it might never be touched but leaving it anyway as a gesture of respect. He did not call out, did not try to close the distance. His role was finished and he let it end with quiet grace. The lioness reached the scrub and paused only long enough to nudge her cub ahead of her. The small body slipped between the stems, tail flicking once before vanishing into the shade. With a final heave of her chest, she followed, her mane brushing the brittle branches as she disappeared into the wild that had shaped her. The road grew empty once more. Dust hung in the air where they had passed, settling slowly into silence. The only sound that lingered was the faint rustle of grass as the wind shifted, carrying with it the memory of the moment. The man stood alone now, but the bond of those hours would not leave him. The image of a wounded mother refusing to surrender, leading her cub away into the uncertain promise of survival, remained carved into him. It was not a story of rescue. It was a story of endurance, of life pressed forward despite pain, of the quiet miracle of walking away together. The sun leaned toward the horizon, casting its light across the land in long, golden beams. The grass swayed gently under the touch of wind, bending and rising again, a rhythm as old as the earth itself. The man watched the place where they had vanished, and then he too turned, his steps slow, his heart quiet. The land settled back into silence. Somewhere beyond the road, in the shadow of the wild, a mother and her cub carried on. And that was enough.